Okay. May 5th, the first Wednesday of May, so you may be hearing sirens in the background. I know I'm hearing sirens myself, and that's just another weather awareness. So let's continue to move forward. My name is Brad Haskamp. I'm the State Adult Education Director with the Minnesota Department of Education. And then let's have the team introduce themselves briefly. Julie?
Hi, I'm Julie Danko. I'm the Transition Specialist.
Excellent, thank you. Astrid?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Astrid Leiden. I'm the Professional Development Specialist on the team.
Great. Jody?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jody. I am the Program Quality Specialist on the team.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. And we have two other members of our team that are not with us in the webinar today. Alice Smith, who many of you know, our administrative support and GED records specialist, working tirelessly to get GED records out for our graduates. And also Lena Zhao from our grants department, and she has been working really hard for us as well with all the variety of grants that we have and the grant issues that come up throughout the year. So two very valuable members of our team as well. Let's go to the next slide. We encourage you to continue sharing ideas and questions throughout the webinar. You can always type in chats, thoughts, ideas, questions in the webinar's chat function. You can also, during Q&A periods, click to raise your hand, and then we can unmute you, and you can unmute yourself to ask the question over the phone or your headset. And as always, Carla Vian from Literacy Action Network is our technical support today. We're so grateful to have Carla providing that support for this webinar, and thankful to Literacy Action Network. If you have any technical assistance needs during this session, please chat to Carla Vian and she'll be happy to help you out. And this May session is always a special session for our web chat. This is our annual ABE grant application session. So we're going to get to that, but let's click and see the agenda. In addition to the grant applications, we're going to talk about some updates and announcements that we have. Then we'll provide an overview of ABE finance and an overview of ABE grants and applications. That'll be the majority of our time today, and talk through the annual ABE grant application. A lot of details there. So let's get started with some of our announcements and updates. First, this week is Teacher Appreciation Week. But we should not need Teacher Appreciation Week to show our appreciation for our adult education teachers. We are so very grateful for our adult education teachers and all of the hard work that you do each and every year. This past year in particular, you have gone above and beyond. You've been so innovative, so creative. You've been so persistent. You are doing some amazing work as adult education teachers. And I really hope that each of you, whether you're a teacher, I hope that you hear the appreciation. If you're an administrator, you are also appreciated. And I hope that you're finding ways to appreciate your teachers, the teachers in your program during this week in particular, but also throughout the entire year. On the screen, you see some innovative things that our teachers have been doing over the last year through technology support and pickup, online, improvising online instruction, some creative projects that students can do from home or that teachers can develop from home that creates that classroom in the home atmosphere. So thank you so much, teachers, for all of your great work, and I encourage you to share our appreciation with your teachers. I also encourage you to shout out your support for teachers on Mighty Networks, and in an email that we sent out from my email address yesterday, we did provide some additional information about how to log on to Mighty Networks and share your appreciation. One other thing that's happening this month is a lot of state legislative bills are being passed. And so we wanted to give you a state legislative update. Education omnibus bills have passed both the House and the Senate. There are differences, though, in the bills. The conference committee is working to negotiate the final bill. The education omnibus bills have ABE funding allocations for the next year. It's important to know that right now both bills have had either equal or a slight increase in funding, but we'll see what the final bill comes out to be. But right now it looks like it could likely be equal or slightly increased funding for state allocation. Also, subsidies for the high school equivalency assessments. And right now there's it could either be going back to $40 max per tester, or maybe a full subsidy for tester. There's differences in the bills between the House and the Senate. Also, there's clarifications and changes to the ABE funding growth factor. One, just to make sure that it doesn't mean that ABE funding at the state level could decrease from year to year, but there's also the possibility the House had proposed maybe a slight change or a tweak based on a proposal from Literacy Action Network to change how we determine ABE growth and funding growth, and that would connect it to growth in K-12 funding. And there's other educational language in those omnibus bills. In addition to the omnibus bills, there are other items like the extra $10 million at one point in ABE funding that programs could use for the next year. Those are not in the omnibus bill, some of those other proposals, but they are in other bills. But right now, they have not passed both the House and the Senate. So stay tuned on some of that work. And at this point, I want to make sure that we take some questions, but also see if anyone else has any other legislative updates that they would like to propose or share. I see Scott Helland has a question saying that only $30 per test for the full price. So the subsidy, right now, the Senate has passed a bill that says that it will go back to the $125,000 allocation and a max of $40 total per tester. And then the House has proposed making the full test subsidy or a free full test battery for each tester permanent in state legislation. So those are the two bills that are currently being that have been passed in the legislature, and the conference committee will negotiate between those two proposals. Looking for help from the rest of the team. Or if anyone would like to share, I see someone has their hand up.
Hey, Brad. This
Go ahead, Tom.
Excellent. Tom.
I just wanted to mention, for you who are interested, we're in the midst of writing a letter from Literacy Action Network to the conference committee regarding the various things that need to be in the final bill. And we will be hopefully sending that out to Literacy Action Network membership within the next day, so that anybody who's interested can also contact the key people on the conference committee, the chairman, and in favor of the ABE factors. So we just want people to be aware of that.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom. And I'm glad that you and Literacy could share that legislative update on behalf of Literacy Action Network. Thank you. Any other legislative updates or questions? If not, don't worry, we will have some Q&A time here in a little bit. Astrid, sorry, I interrupted.
No, just wanted to say I don't see any other hands up or chat updates.
Okay, well, let's move to the next slide then. We also have our new contact hour working group up and running. You'll see on the slide our representatives. We have 11 members for this committee. Originally, I know in the email we thought we were going to recruit 9. We had so many great applicants, and I wish we could have accepted everyone, but honestly, we probably couldn't have had that large of a committee. It just would not have worked, but we're very proud to have these 11 representatives on the new contact hour working group committee, and their purpose, their mission is to make a recommendation on what the contact hour reporting period should be for 2022-23 adult basic education funding. That recommendation will go to both Literacy Action Network and us at the Minnesota Department of Education. Ideally, that recommendation would adhere to state statute, meaning we can implement it. However, we acknowledge that they might potentially advocate for some changes to state statute. If there are any proposed if they are advocating for proposed changes to statute, we can try to push that forward. But of course, that goes a little bit outside of Literacy Action Networks and our the adult education at MDE's hands. That would require for us, like, the inclusion of the governor, the commissioner, and of course the legislature would have to propose that, or would have to pass that. So there would be a lot of additional people that would need to help pass that. So just things that we will have to keep in mind as we move forward. This group is going to meet from April to July, but they could need additional sessions. There's going to be a lot of modeling and work ahead. We had our first meeting last week. And during that meeting, we did a comprehensive training and had some in-depth conversations on the adult education funding formula and its implications. I'm really thankful for Eric Nessheim and Jody Versailles and the group for having that, presenting that, and having a great conversation about that work and how the funding formula works and what are the implications when we make various tweaks. Thank you very much. And we know how important this group is because we've heard from you that many of you are saying that as of May 1st, things aren't back to quote unquote normal, or the number of contact hours you're generating now, you're not fully comfortable with yet. And so we hear you, and that's why this group's work is so important. And we will continue to listen to your feedback. And this group is a great representative group of our adult education system. I think we can move ahead. We also want to share that there is some ESSER funding that potentially could be available. ESSER stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funding. And so you can see on the screen that ESSER 1 was passed in March 2020 through the CARES Act. ESSER 2 was through the CRRSA Act in December. And ESSER 3 was passed here in March through the ARP Act. And with those funds, 90% of ESSER funding goes to districts and charter schools that receive Title I funding. This funding is intended to support schools and their work. And note, though, that adult education is one of the many allowable activities or uses of the funds. And why we're bringing this up now again, ESSER 3 funding is greater than ESSER 2 funding or ESSER 1 funding. So there's a lot of funding that schools might have available to them, and if you have needs with your adult education program, we really encourage you to reach out to your district and inquire about this funding and ask if adult education could be included if you have some significant need. And we're also curious to know, have any of you already been in discussions about ESSER funding with your district? Have any of your programs received ESSER funding? I see Teresa Zingery is saying that ESSER funding paid for their hotspots in one of the districts at Metro North. That's excellent. Very excellent to hear. Anyone else within your district or your ABE program, have you been able to have conversations about ESSER funding, or has your program received any ESSER funding? Chelsea Ritland is saying that through ESSER 1 funding, they paid for hotspots as well. Excellent. We do have the website here that you can click to find more information about this ESSER funding, and that's on the Minnesota Department of Education website. Astrid, would you be able to click and enter that website into the chat? Then, so please continue to, thank you, Astrid, for sharing that link. Please continue to talk, we encourage you to talk to your districts about that. Next topic are the HISEAs, high school equivalency assessments. And yes, we have talked about this many, many times over the last couple of years. We're excited to say that the reviewers have finished their evaluations and their recommendations. So that means that a contract or contracts are being negotiated. Unfortunately, we cannot announce any results of that competition at this point, but we can announce the results after the negotiation period has ended. And then at that point, we will be able to announce which test or which tests will be approved and would have a contract starting July 1 of 2021. And please note that would be the start. If there's any changes to testing, that would be the start of a transition period. It's not saying that there would be a hard stop with say GED and a hard start with only one other test at that time. Just saying if there's any changes to the tests, that starting July 1, we would have a transition period with testing if it's needed. So stay tuned. We'll let you know as soon as we can make any announcements public. And one other thing to know is I've been wanting to form this group for a while. Thinking about the last year and all of the changes that we've seen with high school equivalency testing, online proctoring, safety requirements that you've been putting in at your local test centers, we are going to create a high school equivalency testing advisory group to really help guide us on policies, recommendations, professional development and training needed, communications that are needed. Just overall, an HSE advisory group will be formed in the next couple months here to really talk about and focus on HSE testing efforts around the state. And then finally, I wanted to share a little bit about the August submission. Yes, I know many of you are thinking about the June submission, and we're really focused right now. You might be really focused on your June annual application, and that's a huge priority right now, and we'll talk a lot more about that later. But we do want to give you a heads up about a future submission, the August submission. And every consortium must submit the following by 3:30 p.m. on Monday, August 2nd. There are a couple items that we're adding to this August submission. One, the volunteer reports that are usually a separate submission. We are going to build the volunteer reports into this the set of August submissions, or the reports are submitted in August. We also will new requests will be asking for how much money your consortium spent on one stop. That means Career Force Center and system contributions, and that is both funding that you might have paid or in-kind contributions you might have made, and that would be probably identified through your infrastructure funding agreement. But we'll be asking for what your contributions were for the past year for the August submission. There is a potential that we might be also bringing in the employer engagement request or your list at that time. Or that may be a separate request. We're not sure yet. We need more information from DEED before we can make that official. And just like in the last couple of years, we also will need your level gains with post-test reports for all ABE participants, your training costs and an IET like we requested last year, and also just to verify that the FY22 funding is accurate and the data for your consortium is accurate. So just giving you a heads up about that future August submission. More information and guidance will be released in early June about this. So at this point, I think I'm going to turn it over to Julie. Julie.
Thank you, Brad. A few updates here. One of them is regarding integrated English literacy and civics education grants. I have listed the current grantees to the left of this slide here, and then just to update you on what you should expect in June and July is that our grant specialist, Lena Zhao, will be sending out an official grant award notification, and that should come at the end of May up until June 30th. It really depends on when we receive our official notification from our federal office. So that's why it's not an exact date. And so after she sends that out, we need it signed as soon as possible and sent back to the office, and then Lena will send out a budget for you to complete for the following year, the 21-22 year. And then the final program and financial reporting forms for this current year will be due July 15th. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to me regarding that, but that's just to give you some idea of the timeline for the grant. We can move on to the next slide, please. And this is just a reminder for the regional transitions plans. We've bumped up the due date this year just so that we can have all the activities finalized by July 1st. So the plans will be due May 20th. And we've been encouraging integrated in education training as activities that are included in the grant. So the final report for this current year, 2020-2021, will again be due July 15th. Next slide, please. This is a reminder that Pathways to Prosperity grants, we're hoping we will see a renewal of the funding. And if we do, currently there's about 7 million that will be allocated to Pathways to Prosperity if it goes through. So typically those grant notices will be posted between July and September sometime, depending on the Office of Adult Career Pathways at DEED, depending on their when they actually post them. So I would encourage you now to start connecting with training partners and discuss what collaborations you might be able to make regarding Pathways to Prosperity grant. And if the this is just a reminder, if the training provider is in Minnesota State, please contact the ABE consortium that is in those geographic boundaries first. So sometimes what happens with Pathways to Prosperity is that someone at a local college might have a connection with an ABE provider, so they reach out to them. But what they don't realize is that that's not the ABE provider that kind of has that right of first refusal because they're not located within those boundaries. So please keep that in mind if you're considering writing for this grant. And also another reminder that ABE is a required partner in these grants. And so this is probably the one grant that DEED offers where ABE is a required partner and has to be written into the grant. So there's a good possibility that these grants will be funded and they will help out ABE programs, especially again around adult career pathways and IET. Next slide, please. This is an announcement that came from DEED, and I should have said this earlier. For those of you who aren't familiar with DEED, DEED is the state agency, the Department of Employment and Economic Development. And they actually offer several grant opportunities that ABE can actually participate in. And what they are doing is providing engagement sessions, and the dates are listed here and the registration is listed here, and they're kind of seeking information from the community and also providing information about all the different grants that are available for people to apply for. And so if you can attend one of those, I would encourage you to attend because there's additional funding, just like our office has it. DEED also has received additional funding that they need to get out the door as quickly as possible. And I have also included in the resources for this webinar a handout on the community engagement sessions, a handout on the Pathways to Prosperity model, where you can see ABE definitely is embedded. And actually, I think that's the only handouts I put in there. So if you have any questions, please just put them in the chat and I can respond, or you can reach out to me directly. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. We also have a couple of professional development announcements, and save the dates. We want to make sure that everyone has a few of our upcoming adult career pathway webinars on their radar. Next week, we have an integrated education and training 101 webinar that will be an overview of the key components of IET from both the state and local perspective, a review of the required forms and the process for IET development. Then the following week, manufacturing careers networking session. This will kick off with a DEED representative sharing the state of the manufacturing field in Minnesota currently. And then we'll hear from an ABE program that is operating a manufacturing IET, and then some time for you all to network and share what curricula, resources, contacts you've been using in your manufacturing career programming. And then looking ahead to June, we have another webinar focused on IET, this time really honing in on writing that single set of learning objectives that are a required component of IET. We have a few national presenters coming in to walk through a step-by-step process for developing those objectives. So we hope that many of you will be able to attend. You can register for these events as well as many other webinars on the Atlas Professional Development Calendar. Let's go to the next slide. Looking ahead to the fall and winter, and please save the date for a number of our statewide conferences that have been set. The first one, of course, is our ABE Summer Institute. It will be virtual again this year on August 18th and 19th. The call for proposals is now open and proposals are due May 31st, and hope that many of you will consider submitting a proposal or encouraging your staff to submit a proposal. As Brad said earlier, we know there's been some really incredible innovative work done this year. So this is an amazing opportunity to share with others across the state what's been working and lessons learned, and an opportunity for you to encourage your teachers to share what they've been doing in their classrooms. Also looking ahead, we have dates for the Math Institute, Support Services Conference, Volunteer Management Conference, and Language and Literacy Institute. So mark your calendars. We are still in the process of making some decisions about fall regionals. A survey went out to the North and South managers seeking input on the delivery method, whether people would prefer to have those events in person or virtually. We will be meeting with the statewide professional development committee next week to take a look at that data and make some decisions about fall regional events. So stay tuned. I also want to draw your attention to the applications that are now available for our various professional development advisory groups. I think one of the components of our professional development system that really makes our PD relevant and rich is the input from all of you and your colleagues who serve on our many advisory groups. This is a chance for you to directly inform the professional development and technical assistance that's going out to the field. So we're currently seeking applications for the statewide professional development committee that advises on all of the work as a whole, the language and literacy advisory team, the Minnesota numeracy instruction advisory team, the adult career pathways professional development advisory team, and new this coming year, an administrator professional development advisory team to help support the work of you all in managing and administering ABE programs. So these applications are due June 4th. You can find more information in the link here, and I'll ask one of my colleagues to pop that link in the chat. There's a newsletter article that details a little bit more about these opportunities and links to the application. And then also do keep an eye out, as Brad said, we will be also launching a high school equivalency exam advisory group, and the distance learning team will also be seeking members in the next few weeks. So lots of opportunities to get involved and provide input on the professional development coming out to you and your colleagues. Let's go to the next slide. Brad mentioned Mighty Networks earlier. Mighty Networks is a new networking platform that is free to practitioners, being paid for by Atlas. This is replacing our existing Schoology groups. We have had a number of Schoology groups for several years, but more recently we realized that the instructor accounts for Schoology are no longer free. So we wanted to have an option for networking across our state that would be free to the user. So encourage you to join Mighty Networks. Check out the welcome post to get set up. I'll post a link in the chat so you can find some more information about how to get set up. Our Schoology courses will continue as usual. So the ABE Foundation, CCRS Foundation, some of the courses that have been developed will continue to exist in Schoology, but the groups are now being moved to Mighty Networks. So we hope to see you over there. There are a variety of different groups and topics that you can subscribe to get tailored information. So it's an opportunity to network with others from around the state. And I think at this point we will pause to see if there are any questions people have about the announcements to date before we move into talking about finance and grants.
Looks like we have 2 hands up. Susan Alt, your hand was up, and so I've unmuted you. You'll need to unmute yourself if you have a question, and you can share. Susan Alt. Well, Susan is unmuting herself. Susan Evans also has a question or has her hand up, so I'm going to unmute Susie Evans, and Susie, you can share your question.
Oh, thanks everybody. Hi, Susie here. Just a stupid question, obviously. I have a lot of those today. Astrid, with the new HISET and Brad, is there school district approval of anything necessary for these tests? I know that as we work as an ALP for high school diploma, we are very linked into everything with our school district. So, you know, GED, I understand HISET might live in that area a little bit, but does there have to be any district buy-in for this equivalency?
Susie, I'm a little confused by your question.
Well, thank you,
in terms
Brad.
of which...
That is my intent, yes. No, like, so this is going to be an ABE thing, just statewide. HISET, right?
No, there is no official announcement on which test or which tests will be approved in Minnesota this next year.
Brad, it's always nice talking to you. I'm just, you know, probably putting my cart in front of the horses, and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that maybe there was some confusion about the acronym HISEAs. We've been using that to describe the Minnesota High School Equivalency Assessments.
Right, and that's a generic term for any assessment that could be used for high school equivalency purposes and for our competition. HISEAs, not to be confused with HISET.
Okay. So I hope that I have thoroughly confused anyone on this call, and you can find me on Facebook to congratulate me or thank me, and I really appreciate everybody's time.
Excellent.
That's where I was confused.
I appreciate you
sure.
asking the question though, Susie, because I'm guessing there might be others that could be confused, and so I appreciate the clarification on terminology.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Totes confused everybody. Okay, bye.
Yep. I see in the chat we also had a question about, have we heard anything more about CASA's goals being approved for ESL levels or for English language learning? And as Marty Olson stated, there's no news on the CASA's goals series being approved for ELL or the federal ESL levels.
Not seeing any other hands raised. Oh, we have another question from Bergen. Is there a timeline for an update on the ELL standardized assessments?
I laugh in misery here, Bergen. The feds do not provide any hard timeline. These tests were originally submitted a couple of years ago, and in true unknown bureaucratic fashion, they obviously can take years and years to get approved and to get through the process from the by the feds. So at this point, the only hard timeline is that any new test has to typically be submitted in the fall, and then they get feedback and either approval through a federal announcement or ongoing feedback. And as we've heard, all ELL or English Language Learning assessments for ESL levels in the federal ESL national reporting system, all of those have none of them have been approved going forward, in no new tests. And so they continue to go through evaluation with the feds, and we don't know when that evaluation period will end. And Susan Wentkamp-Brandt, there's no news about TABE Class E either. They're in the same boat as CASA's goals. If you think it's frustrating at your end, imagine being a test publisher and going through this. Yeah, so I also hear, Linda, you saying that you hear that CASAS is looking for programs who are interested in participating or piloting potential ELL tests before potential submission to NRS. Yes, one of the things that the feds require is piloting and data on how well aligned the tests are compared to prior tests or compared to the standards, and so they need to do piloting with adult education programs. And so I appreciate those of you that have been willing to do piloting with some of the tests, as CASAS and or TABE have reached out to you. But those, you are right, Scott, that those pilots, if you do piloting of any new tests that a test vendor is working on, unfortunately, those test results are not able to be inputted into SID, and they don't officially count for as a measurable skill gain because they haven't been approved yet. So I think on the testing front, stay tuned, and we'll see when we find out any news about any newly approved tests. And yeah, Linda, you're saying that CASAS has been willing to pay students on Amazon, like $5 Amazon cards, anyone who is willing to participate in the piloting process, and that's been helpful. Yep. And Marilyn's sharing a link as well to CASAS and some of the research and field testing opportunities that they have available. Thank you for sharing that, Marilyn. Any other questions? If not, I'm going to turn it over to Jody for the big chunk of this session and the focus of this session.
All right. Thanks, everyone. At this point, we're going to transition to focusing on finance, grants, and the annual grant application for this year. So we wanted to start off by giving you all kind of some reminders, basically, about ABE finance. And I do want to acknowledge that there are some of you listening who probably could give this presentation better than me because you've done this every year for many years. But I also know that we have some newer folks, and we also sometimes our ABE folks across the state are working in quite isolated settings. So we just want to be sure that everybody has a baseline of information about financial things, because they are important. So I'm going to kind of start with the basics, but move pretty quickly. We won't spend too much time on this, but just want to be sure that you all know that as we are this time of year, we are talking a lot about the annual ABE application, and we'll be giving you more information about that coming up. So that application is for sort of two streams of funding. There's state ABE funding, which is Fin Code 322, and federal ABE funding, which is Fin Code 438. So just in case some of you listening are like, what is a Fin Code? Those are from UFARS. And what UFARS is, I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's basically, it's a coding system that school districts have to use to track and report spending. So we do acknowledge there are some of you out there who are working at ABE providers that are not school districts, but because all of this funding is flowing through the Department of Education, you all have to use these UFARS codes. So if you work for a district, there's somebody in your business office who's very familiar with UFARS. If you don't work for a district, there may be less familiarity, but unfortunately you do need to have at least enough familiarity with those codes to use them for reporting on your ABE funding. So just some kind of baseline reminders about state and federal ABE funding. And these reminders are for you, but also these are sort of things that you can keep tucked away in case you need to remind other people around you about these things, like your community ed director or your executive director or other folks in K-12. So state and federal ABE funding can only be used to fund ABE programming for eligible adults. That funding cannot be used for anything, any programming that is K-12 or anything that is general community ed. And that is defined in state statute and federal law. So we had a few issues over the past year when the pandemic disrupted everything and staff were being shifted around in districts. I know we heard from some of you out there who said, oh, my ABE staff are being pulled to do childcare or something like that. And that's problematic. And I want you all to feel empowered and equipped to advocate for your ABE programs with your larger districts and your larger organizations, and just know that these funds have to serve adults with ABE programming. So also another thing to know about ABE funds is technically the way that the funds flow, they are designed as reimbursement. So you all are spending money to run programming, to pay teachers and pay for space and purchase supplies and things like that. And then your whatever entity, district or whatever entity is getting reimbursed for the cost of running that programming. And therefore, none of these funds can be used to build up a fund balance. They cannot be saved year over year at the district level. So if you ever hear anyone talking about putting ABE funds and building up a fund balance, you're going to want to ask some questions about that, because that is not an allowable way to use ABE funds. So a couple of the things, there are some caps on how much of your ABE funding can be spent on admin expenses. There's a 5% cap on state funding, there's a 5% cap on federal funding. And it is important to know that that cap is for the entire amount awarded to the consortium, not for individual providers. So if there's one provider within the consortium that has a little bit higher admin expenses, it's going to have to be offset somewhere else, but it can't be more than 5% of that total grant amount. And operationally speaking, the way that we check for that on our end is we do look at that UFARS coding, and we look specifically at UFARS Object Code 110. So Object Code 110 is the code that should be used to code salary of an administrator who doesn't directly oversee programming. So for most of you, I'm gonna guess all of you listening in right now, your role is directly, either you are an instructor, you work with students, or you are a manager, a coordinator, someone who directly oversees the people who work with students and kind of is in charge of programming. So all of you, your salary should not be coded to 110. If you're a manager, your salary would be coded to 120. That Object Code 110 is typically for a small proportion of your supervisor's salary. So like your community ed director or your executive director or somebody who really doesn't direct the operations of programming day to day. So just a note on that, because occasionally if your salary as the ABE manager gets coded to Object Code 110, then that could be a flag on our end that it looks like you are over that admin cap, but we don't consider that a violation of the cap. We know that it takes, in many cases, a full-time ABE manager to really oversee ABE programming. So a couple of reminders as we approach the end of the fiscal year. For federal funds, keep in mind that federal funds have to be spent by June 30th. June 30th is the end of the fiscal year. Federal ABE funds cannot be spent after that time. After the end of the fiscal year, after you've spent all of those funds, you have a couple of months to actually draw them down in serves. Remember, this is kind of a reimbursement model, so you have a couple months to go in and say, yep, we spent these funds, please reimburse us. But please do that before October 1st. And after that date, if you try to draw down those fiscal 21 funds, it gets more complicated in our system. So please keep in mind that you need to draw those down by October 1st.
Hey, Jody.
Yes.
We have a couple questions in the chat, and I was wondering if you could address them.
Yep.
One question is about the federal cap. Did the federal cap change? I thought that it was 20%. And similar to that, there was a question, is there a higher admin rate for CBOs, say 8%?
Yeah, good questions. I'm gonna rely on you too, Brad, to make sure that I have the right answers to these questions. I do think there has been some maybe changes of interpretation about the admin cap specifically for federal funds over time. Keep in mind, your federal funds are quite small, and so a small percentage of your federal funds is typically not a lot of funding. But we do have listed in the assurances for the current annual application that those caps are both set at 5%. I believe what you're referring to, there is some, I forget if it's in statute or maybe it's in, I'm not sure if it's in rule or policy or where it is, but yeah, there was some kind of allowance perhaps for certain kinds of entities and possibly going over that admin cap. My understanding of that was intended to be kind of a negotiation between that entity and MDE. So I guess my thought is, and I'll let you chime in too, Brad, if you have a specific question and if you are really feeling like you need to spend more than 5% of your federal ABE funds on admin expenses, that'd be a good thing to reach out to our office to talk more about.
I agree with that, yes.
Okay. Is there another question in the chat here, Brad, that you might check? I don't quite see all of it, so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a question from Susie Evans saying, sure would be nice to have something in policy that states that chargebacks can only be used for entities that support /serve /provide space for ABE directly. And I know this chargeback issue, so the term is not an official term. I mean, chargebacks, could be indirect costs, things like that. And so I know that as we've talked about indirect costs, that there are differences in what you can have for indirect costs and the admin. Oh gosh, Jody, I apologize. I'm butchering this, so I might need to turn it back over to you to answer that question on chargeback.
Yeah, no, I think you're going in the right direction, Brad. I know we've had a little bit of conversation about this, Susie, and yeah, unfortunately, the term chargeback isn't really an official term, although I recognize some districts are using it as a technical term, but it's not really addressed in policy or statute. One sort of hard line we can draw is that ABE funding should only be used by ABE providers. So within a particular consortium, there may be different members of the consortium, and in some cases, some of those districts are actually paying teachers and providing services, and some of those districts are not. I think what we can definitely say is if a district is not providing any ABE service, if they're not hiring teachers, they're not paying for the cost of programming, they shouldn't be charging some costs back. to the fiscal agent district. However, it's trickier, and I know this is your situation, Susie, when you're talking about the district that is the provider, right? So your district is running ABE programming. So then the question of, you know, which kind of overhead costs are allowable is, yeah, it is a lot more gray. And as long as the district isn't going over the 5% admin caps, then on our end, we don't have a hard and fast way to dictate what that chargeback can or can't be. So.
Thanks, Jody. And I will say it looks like we have a hand up as well. Maybe someone with a question. Susie Evans has a question or has her hand up. Susie, you're unmuted on our end.
Okay, thanks. I'll try not to confuse anybody or draw this out, but it's a confusing piece that if ABE is providing our own clerical support staff, all those pieces, and then we end up paying $20,000 for a clerical person in community ed who has never even talked to us. Those are pieces that get really hard for me not to fight, but I would like to use the word educate the district and my supervisor on that $20,000 really could be used for a part-time teacher or blah, blah, blah. We have our own staff. We answer our own phone calls, you know, that kind of thing. But if there's nothing that's going to change in ABE language, I don't think there's anything I can do to argue my point any more effectively than I already have tried. I would love for you to find something for me.
Yeah,
unfortunately,
I'm not aware of any specific language that you can use in that case other than the 5% cap, and I know that that isn't enough in your case. So I think my best recommendation is to try to make a case by checking with other ABE folks in other districts across the state and try to argue that that's not, that other districts are making a different choice that you feel is better practice.
I already did that. So I'm just going to keep my my pie holes shut so I can keep my job. But if there was a way for us to come together, if somebody's got something in language, but if it's not statute, it's not going to fly. But thanks for listening to me cry a little bit today.
Sure. And maybe if anybody listening has any thoughts for Susie or any strategy or any suggestions, feel free to reach out to her. All right, I'm going to keep going, or is there anything else anybody sees we need to address at this point? Okay. So just to kind of wrap up about federal funding, I want to put it out to you quickly. Can anybody out there tell me what happens if you reach the end of the year and you actually didn't spend all of your federal ABE funds? What happens to those funds that are left? Any thoughts? Anybody who is a quick typer? I'll pause for just a second. You can put it in the chat. All right, thank you, Kathy. Yep. All right, excellent. Thank you, Mary Lynn. Okay, so this is a small but important detail, I would say. If you do not spend all of your federal ABE funds, you do not get to keep them. However, they do stay in our ABE system. So whatever is unspent from one year actually rolls over into our pot for the next year, and we get to distribute it out. So that is a nice thing about federal funding, actually, is that we don't completely lose it. You as a provider, as a consortium, you don't have access to it anymore, but it goes back into the pot and it gets distributed out the following year. So important thing to keep in mind. All right, and then a couple of thoughts and reminders about state funding. As we approach the end of the fiscal year, remember that up to 20% of your total state award can be spent after the fiscal year ends. So between July 1 and September 30th of the following fiscal year. We sometimes call that quarter 5. So I know some of you out there do this, and that's good. It is a good way to use up any funds that you have left over. The key thing is when you do this, you have to be sure that it is course coded correctly. And again, I'm talking about UFARS codes. So you have to use a specific course code when you do this. Otherwise, our reconciliation at the end of the fiscal year and a year later gets messy. So for this current year, so this fiscal year ends June 30th of this year. If you have leftover state funding at that point and you're going to use it, spend it up between July and September, those expenditures need to be course coded 001 in UFARS. So just a note, I know some of you like these details and are, up on these kind of accounting topics. So carryover codes are getting a little, are confusing at this point in the decade, where there's a set of 10 codes that we use. And now with when we started a new decade in 2020, we're essentially sort of rolling back and starting over on those codes. So last year for fiscal year 20 funds, the code you used was 010. So confusingly enough, the code you want to use for fiscal year 21 or this current year's funding, if you're carrying that over, is 001. And then after that, it gets easier again. Then a year from now, or in July of 2022, you'll use 002. So just a note about those codes. And then kind of final detail about state funding. So again, a quick quiz. So if you get to the end of the year, and then, or after the end of that additional quarter, you've got an additional quarter to spend up anything that's not spent. But let's say you get to September, the end of September 2021, you have some money from your original award that you didn't spend. What happens to those funds? Because it is a little different than what happens to your federal funds. Pause for a second. Thank you, Deb, for your answer. Any other answers? So, good guess, Deb, but that is not correct. In the case of state funds, it does not go to Brad's vacation home, but those funds go basically back into the general state account. So they are lost to our ABE system. They are no longer specifically, education funds. They are just general state funding. So essentially, if we don't spend our state ABE funds, we lose them. So it's just an interesting thing to keep in mind is that federal funds that are unspent sort of stay in the system, but state funds that are unspent are gone. So actually, maybe in retrospect, maybe that is what you meant, Deb. So I apologize. Maybe that wasn't a wrong answer. So at this point, we just encourage you to be checking in with your accountant or your business office and thinking about end of fiscal year, as I know many of you are already doing. And here are some suggestions for questions that you might be asking at this point. So you might be asking, are expenditures on track with the budget? Have we actually spent what we budgeted and planned for what we were going to spend? Or did we have some changes that resulted in a change in spending? Like, did a position go unfilled for a while, or did we have to cancel a class because of low enrollment? Did something happen that got us off of the budget? And how much of our funding do we have left at this point? How can we be sure to use all of the federal funds by June 30th? And are we going to have state funds still left by June 30th? And if so, can we figure out how to use those in that 5th quarter or before July 30th? Let's see, Chelsea, I see your question. Is there a deadline to course code 001 for July to September expenses to charge to fiscal year 21 carryover? Good question. I think ideally, when those expenditures occur, they should be course coded 001. Now I recognize, sometimes there's a little bit of like looking back and, fixing some things up and changing some things around and stuff. We actually, on our end here at MDE, will not be checking for that 001 course code until the following fiscal year. So I think, practically speaking, the answer to your question is no, there isn't really a deadline, other than, you know, best accounting practice is to, you know, do it as close as possible to when the expenditure actually occurred. Good question. Great. I'll pause for just a second if there are any other questions about this finance stuff. And I just want to recognize, again, there's a lot of expertise sort of in the room here and in the group. We have some ABE managers who've been around for a long time and know a lot about these things. So I encourage you to reach out to each other. I encourage you to talk to your business office staff, your accountant, understand some aspects of it that you maybe don't. You can check for info on the grants of the MDE website. Specific questions about federal funding and SERVs can go to Lena at the Department of Education. She works in the grants department and she is our SERVs kind of guru. And other questions can be directed to me. All right. I think I'm going to keep us going here. Okay, so next we wanted to take a little bit of time to just give you an overview. Again, make sure everybody kind of has a baseline of information about what are relevant ABE grants and applications that you need to be aware of and have on your radar. So this chart just shows you what the different grants and applications are and the timelines. Next, I'm going to talk you through the annual ABE application for this year. So that's the one that's always due on June 1st. I will also give you a little more info about the 5-year narrative. That's something you only have to do once every 5, or now we've kind of added another year in there, but 5+ years. There is the IELCE or Civics grants. The last time we ran a competition for that was in May 2019. So I know some of you hold those grants and those are renewable for 3 years. The next time we will open up that competition will be basically a year from now. So in May of 2022 will be another opportunity for new applicants or applicants who are applying again to apply for those IELCE grants. And then we also have the federal ABE competition, which we did in 2017 and is coming up again. I'll talk a little bit about that. So those first 4 are really, those are state and federal adult education funds, but then we recognize that there may be other grants where ABE is a partner and is a recipient of some of those grants funds. So we know many of you have gotten Pathways to Prosperity grants in the past. We know sometimes you get foundation grants like United Way or that kind of thing. But obviously the due date and the time period on those varies. So that's just an overview of the grants and applications you need to be aware of. In terms of 5-year narratives, our whole statewide system is divided up into cohorts. This is the group that's working very hard on their narratives this year that are due in about a month. So I know they are all painfully aware of that upcoming due date. And then this is the group of consortia that are sort of on deck, and they are, this group of consortia is required to provide reviewers for the narratives submitted in June. So I know I've reached out to all of you in that group. That narrative review will happen in June. We're planning on meeting via webinar to discuss as reviewers on June 24th. We probably could use some additional reviewers in that group. So even if your consortium is not required to review, you could volunteer to do so. It's a great way to learn about other ABE consortia. It is a bit of a time commitment, so just want to be real about that. But if you're interested, shoot me an email. And then just a heads up to everyone to remember and know that there will not be any 5-year narratives due in 2022. And in 2022, we are going to re-compete the federal ABE funds. So that will be something that applies to all current ABE consortia that want to continue receiving federal funding. You will need to work on that application essentially a year from now, and then we'll restart the regular five-year narrative cycle in 2023. All right, so finally, this is kind of the last chunk of information that we have for you today. And that is about this year's annual ABE grant application. So I just want to let you know off the bat that we normally give this information in a workshop in person at the spring regionals. Obviously, we couldn't do that this year. So like last year, I recorded a set of just quick video tutorials about the application documents and the tables. And those are all available on our website. If you have already listened to those, just know that what I'm going to say, what I'm going to walk you through next is basically pretty much the same content from that video series. So if you understand all of that and you don't have any questions, no judgment if you decide to hop off now or if you want to multitask a little bit. But this will be another opportunity to kind of hear that same set of information about the application. So the annual grant application is similar to most years. It is available on the MDE website, and it consists of 3 documents: the application, the instruction, and the tables. And as usual, it is due on June 1st, which this year is a Tuesday. It is due by 3:30 p.m. in serves. So just a reminder, this was a little new wrinkle that was added last year, but hopefully didn't cause anybody too much of a problem. It used to be the application documents were available just publicly accessible on the MDE website. That is no longer the case. So someone, either you or someone in your business office who has EDM access, which is like an extra layer of security, will have to go into serves and download those documents. So just a reminder about that. And then just a quick overview of the process. First of all, somebody's got to log into serves, download the documents. There are 2 documents that need to be completed: the application, which is a Word document, the tables, which is an Excel document. And I just want to point out, because this does kind of come up every year, boy, it would be nice if we had a way to get your data directly from SID into our software systems at MDE, but we do not. So we need you to get your data out of SID and type it into that Excel document and submit it in serves. I apologize, it seems a little redundant, but it is just the way the process has to work. When those documents are finished, the application and the tables, they need to be uploaded back into serves, and then your authorized signer has to log in and add their virtual signature by that June 1st deadline. Usually your authorized signer is your superintendent if you're in a district, or an executive director or somebody like that. This last step is not difficult or time consuming, but it can be problematic if your authorized signer is on vacation on June 1st. So you just want to plan ahead and make sure that the right people know, so that that person is available to log in quickly and sign that application once it gets submitted. So just be aware of that. So first of all, I want to take a minute to just talk you through the application document. It looks very similar to other years. And truthfully, it is fairly boilerplate. You fill in, name of the organization and, some of the identifying numbers and who's the program manager and who's the business office contact, things like that. So the only thing to really kind of be aware of in the application document is the assurances. And we just take this time at this point in the year to remind you that those assurances are there. Again, I think it's good as a reminder for all of us who work in ABE, but you also may sometimes use these assurances to help other folks understand what the choices you have to make about your ABE programming based on the requirements that are in this grant application. So There is nothing new in the assurances this year, so they are the same as they have been. Some of them are listed on this screen. Here are a few more. Hopefully none of these are surprising to you, but I think they're occasionally good reminders that, you know, by accepting these funds, these are the things that, that the program is agreeing to do. And there are no new assurances this year, but we did want to just reiterate the one assurance that we actually kind of updated or tweaked the language last year, which is about being sure that the grantee has accurately named and identified classes and sites within SID, because as hopefully you know, data from SID is now sort of automatically populating the adult literacy hotline and career force. So we really need all of that data to be really accurate. So just want to highlight that one. And that's really all you need to know about the application. So then kind of last document in the application is the tables. The tables are one Excel document that have 5 tabs at the bottom. Sometimes folks know, oh, there's multiple tables, and they're looking for multiple documents. So just know it's only one document, but all the tables are on that same document with tabs at the bottom. The tables are the same as last year, so that is good news. The first table is Table A. Table A is where you will list contact hours. And so note that this Table A has the regular standard time period that that you have been reporting on for years and years. So May 1st, 2020 through April 30th, 2021. As I'll say more about in a second, we will not use these hours for funding. However, you are still required to report these student numbers and student hours for that time period. So that is Table A. And then, like last year, you will also need to submit Table A1, which has this adjusted time period. So Table A1, exactly the same as last year, has the time, is for the time period of March 14th, 2019 to March 13th, 2020. So just a reminder about why we did that, why we're asking for that. So for the upcoming fiscal year 22 is the year that starts on July 1st of this year, July 1st, 2021 through June 30th, 2022. If we followed standard practice and standard procedure of our life before COVID, we would have used hours from May 1st, 2020 to April 30th, 2021 to distribute that funding. However, for obvious reasons, because there was massive disruption to ABE programming during that time, the decision was made not to use hours from that time period for funding. Instead, we convened a group of ABE folks from across the state who came to the recommendation that we should just reuse those Table A1 hours one more time. So essentially this means that hours from before COVID, from March 19 to March 20 will be used again, the same count of hours that was used to calculate fiscal year 2021 funding. So when you fill out Table A and Table A1, you may note that in SID, there's no report called Table A1. You'll just run a Table A and change those dates. So be sure that you are changing those to the correct Table A1 dates when you do that. And just notes about these, you know, this data is important. It is tied to funding. We don't have a direct connection between the data in SID and our software systems at MDE, so we do need you to get us that data on the Excel spreadsheet. And for this year, please make sure that what you're submitting on Table A1 is exactly what you submitted a year ago. So you should take a look in SID, and you can do that at this point. Take a look in SID, run that Table A report for the adjusted date range, the March to March dates, and make sure that those numbers look the same as they did a year ago. And if not, you may want to reach out, or you may want to look and see if you can figure out why. And if you can't see why, reach out to the SID support staff. But that data shouldn't have changed, and you should essentially just submit that data again. All right, I'm not seeing any questions. I'm going to keep us going. The next table is table 7, which is about staffing. This is where you report how many part-time staff, how many full-time staff, how many volunteers, and the different roles. So note about this, as of July 1st of last year, we are now requiring all ABE programs to input their staff and volunteers into SID. We recognize for some of you that's been a little bit of extra work. However, hopefully this is where your extra work pays off, because running table 7 from SID is easy. You can just run that report and then key the data into the Excel document. However, we have heard from Jenny and Mary at Urban Planet that some of you out there may need to do a bit of a check. So when you run table 7 from SID, and when you're ready to enter that data into table 7, make sure that your staff and volunteer numbers seem right. Make sure that they're in the ballpark. So if you know that you have, a teaching staff of 10 teachers, and when you run table 7 in SID, it shows 34 teachers, then you should pause for a moment and investigate that. And our understanding is one issue that's coming up here is if your program is not putting an end date for staff and volunteers who are no longer with you, then they will unfortunately still show on table 7. So that is one piece of cleanup you may need to do this year, is to go in and add end dates for staff and volunteers who are no longer with you. If they weren't active this year, just make sure they have an end date as close to accurate as possible, but sometime before July 1, 2020. And if you have more questions about that, you can reach out to the SID support folks. All right, so that's what you need to know about table 7. Table 13 is about funding. This one is the same as it has been in other years. This is just a breakdown of your state and federal funding and how it flows out to different kinds of providers. So for those of you who only have districts in your consortium, one or more districts, this table should be pretty straightforward. For some of you who have community-based organizations or correctional institutions that receive ABE funding, it gets a little bit more complicated. So just some notes about this one. What you report on table 13 should match the amounts on your award letter. So your state award is just a single amount, so that's pretty straightforward. Your federal total should include all the different elements of federal award. You get tech aid and transitions aid, and some consortia get low incidence disability aid. And also we recognize you might have to estimate slightly because we're not at the end of the fiscal year yet, and that is totally fine. Just you can do that based on your plans and your budget. And also, please note that the number of providers that you report here should match the number of providers that you report on table B. And I'll talk about that a little more when I talk about table B. So a couple of really quick examples. So here is an example of a award letter, or like the numbers from an award letter. This is a smaller consortium that has $195,000 in state funding and $9,800 in federal funding. In this example, this consortium has 3 members. They are all school districts, so those totals just all go on the top line of the form and total at the bottom. So that's straightforward. Here's a slightly more complicated example. This consortia represents kind of a bigger consortia that has about $5 million in state funding and about $588,000 in federal funding. And this example consortium has 3 school district members, but also 2 community-based organizations. So you'll just see that the amounts are broken out according to those 2 different types of providers, but still those totals at the bottom should exactly equal the totals on the award letter. So that's what you need to know about table 13. And then the last table in the application is table B. So Table B is essentially the same as last year. Table B is where you list all of the providers in the consortium, all of the programming sites, and then any additional members of the consortium that are not providers. So we know that programming sites is a little trickier this year than it has been in the past. We recognize that there may be some physical programming sites where you are not currently running any in-person programming. And so for this year, our guidance for Table B is, please list all of the sites that you're planning and hoping will be hosting physical programming at some point during the 2021-2022 program year. And don't worry, we won't hold you to it necessarily, but for this year, you can think of this as a little bit forward-looking of like, over the course of this upcoming year, what sites are you planning and hoping to have programming? So we also want to be clear about, for Table B, what we mean when we use the term providers. Basically, when we use the word provider, we are talking about any entity that uses ABE funding to provide ABE instruction. So in all cases, the fiscal agent is a provider. So in all cases, in all consortia, the fiscal agent hires ABE teachers and pays for programming. But in many consortia, the fiscal agent is also passing some of those funds on to other providers, so other entities that are hiring their own teachers. So any of those entities that hire teachers and have their own programming are providers. So just a couple of notes. Again, ABE providers are those entities that pay for programming. All other consortium members that are not providers should be listed in the lower section of this table. When you list the programming site, please use the name of the building the way it's known by the public, the way people in the community would refer to that building. We ask you to use a complete address in a mappable format because we do make a map of these. And please indicate if a site is non-public, for example, a correctional facility. So a couple of really quick examples of Table B. This is borrowed from part of Detroit Lakes Table B from a few years back. So this gives you an example of Detroit Lakes is the provider. Detroit Lakes Public Schools is the provider. They have 5 different sites with complete addresses, and the ones that are not open to the general public are marked as non-public in that right column. Just a note, you'll see here that there is a programming site listed in Olin and Ada, and you'll note that at the in the member section, you can see that those school districts are actually members of the consortium. However, because Detroit Lakes is the provider, so Detroit Lakes is the one paying the teacher, those sites are listed as associated with Detroit Lakes. So another example of how Table B should look, again, this is kind of a partial, some of the information from Southeast ABE Table B from a previous year. So in this example, there are 3 districts that are providers, so 3 districts that are all hiring their own teachers, and then a list of those buildings and the addresses. And in this case, none of them are non-public. And then at the bottom, some additional member districts that are members of the consortium but don't hire their own teachers and are not ABE providers. So a couple incorrect examples. So what not to do, please remember to use the name of the building, not just the city where it's located, but actually how do people refer to it when they're giving directions or telling somebody where to go. And then please be sure to use the complete address so that we can map it. And please remember to mark anything that's non-public, like the Jensen County Jail, we assume is not public. So please be sure to mark that. And then a final note about Table 13 and Table B. So on Table 13, you need to provide you need to list or enter a number of providers. How many providers are there in the consortium? That reported number on Table 13, it should total at the bottom. So in this example, it says 3. that should correspond with, on table B, the number of providers that are listed in the top section of that table. So if you've got a number 3 on table 13 in the consortium total column, then you should have the names of 3 providers on table B. So I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat, but now is your opportunity. That's the information we've got for you. So question about if we didn't physically have classes and buildings due to, oops, my chat just moved on me, due to COVID, but have in the past and hopefully in the future, do we list them? Yes, Jill. If you plan and hope to have programming in that building at that site, sometime in this upcoming program year, so between July 1, 2021 and June 30th, 2022, then yes, please do list that regardless of whether you have physical programming there at the moment. Thank you, Brad. Brad has put into the chat the link to where you can find those video tutorials. Those might be helpful if you come up against a specific question as you're filling out one of these tables. You can refer to those, but of course you can also feel free to reach out to me with any questions. Any other questions about the annual application or about the tables? All right, well, that took us almost up to the end of our time, but we are happy to answer any other questions or address any other concerns about the annual application or about other things at this point. Yeah, so thank you to everybody